So thank you also for coming and participating to our program, sir.
Thank you for having me.
It's an honor for us. So I would like to start actually asking the traditional Russian geopolitics in the Middle East before starting to talk about main reasons that they are backing the Syrian brutal regime. So could you please tell us the traditional Russian geopolitics in the Middle East?
Well, if there's such a thing about traditional, as far as Russia is concerned, I think without referring to the Soviet era, if we're talking from the 1990s till this day, there is no question, probably in the back of the mind of every leader since, they would have liked to think in terms of Russia as a great global power that can influence, that enjoys tremendous influence on a global scale. There's no doubt, however, that much of that has diminished as a result of the collapse of the Soviet Union. But to the extent they can continue to project power, they will do so. And I think we see that in more recent years, in the connection with Syria, in connection of what they did, say, in Afghanistan and had to retreat. So from their perspective, to the extent they can re-establish themselves anywhere, specifically in the Middle East and elsewhere, they're going to try to do that. That's, putting this aside, we have to also think in terms of their geostrategic approach to the Middle East, for example, or to the European community. They know only too well that they are part of Europe. They need to deal with the European community. Their economy has been backwards, so they're going to have to build that in order to be able to compete. And as you probably, I'm sure you remember, only 5-6 years ago, they were not even member of the there were the 7 big powers, but now Russia has been added as of late. So they have a lot of work to do in order to strengthen and re-establish themselves in Europe to begin with. But as far as the Middle East is concerned, there's no question that they have been trying very hard to maintain a semblance of influence. And Syria, in this respect, is the last vestiges, so to speak, of the Soviet era. They have a military naval base in Syria. They have good relationship with Iran. They have direct and indirect influence over Hezbollah in Lebanon, and also with Iraq to a great extent. So for this reason, for them to maintain or continue to support Syria is critical. That is, if and when, and in fact, when Bashar al-Assad collapsed, they would still like to exercise some influence, certainly influence in Syria, because the demise of Bashar al-Assad, if and when that happened, and if Russia does not continue to exercise some influence, it means it will lose tremendous amount of influence over the entire region. And so that is why they fight, and they want to continue to and oppose anything that the United States and the West would like to do in order to influence event in Syria. In the same token, they want to maintain their influence in Iran. So from their perspective, losing Syria could also precipitate losing their influence in Iran as well. So I don't believe they will change that approach. But when you look at their foreign policy, Russia today, it's really entirely based on their oil prowess, oil reserve. I mean, this is the money. So if and when, for example, the price of a barrel of oil goes down to $50 or $45, well, Russia will be the first country to be affected the most. So the oil foreign policy is not sustainable. And then Putin, of course, now had to find means and ways by which to sustain viable foreign policy, even if the oil the price of the oil barrel is reduced by half today.
So you don't agree with the Russians' allegation that the main reason that they're backing the Syrian regime is that they are concerned about the rise of the Islamic movements in the Middle East, actually, particularly in Syria. I mean, if the Syrian regime would collapse, so who's going to replace it? And they say that the Islamists actually will replace it. So this is what they claim, actually. So do you agree with that, or you don't?
No, I really don't, because if you look internally in Syria, I've been very much involved in Syrian affairs, at least since 1994, 95. And if you see today what's happening in Syria, Syria is divided between four major sects, so to speak. One is obviously the Alawite, and you have the Sunnis, you have the Christians, and you have the Kurds. And there are some other smaller groupings. There are Islamists among the Sunnis, there's no question about it. But this is not the movement of the Muslim Brotherhood, say, in Egypt, or in Nahda in Tunisia. They are much weaker, much smaller than that. And there's a tremendous amount of rivalry between the various groupings. So to suggest that Islamists will end up ruling Syria is way overstated. I don't think that's going to happen. Because the Sunni themselves, are very much divided between various groupings. So that is a position they take for outwardly in order to explain their opposition to outright interference in the Syrian internal affairs, but that is not the basis why they object to outside interference.
Mm-hmm. So, sir, how do you think that the Russian geopolitics and the Chinese geopolitics differ in the region? Do you think that they agree on everything, or there are some separations between them?
No, look, their interest is different. China, for example, imports nearly 20% of its oil from Iran. So if they don't oppose direct intervention in Syria, the Iranians are going to be very unhappy about it. So there is economic, relationship that they want to safeguard. Russia's interest in Syria is different. It's because, as I said earlier, they have a naval base. They want to maintain their influence over the crescent from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. So for them, this is an entirely geostrategic consideration than the Chinese have. But there's another consideration, and that is both of them would like to say no to things that the United States would like to achieve. And that's the mentality of the Cold War, as far as Russia is concerned. And I think Putin is desperately would like to reassert himself as a leader. And to do so, he has to stand up to the United States. And this is how he does it. He's standing up to the United States to show the Russian people, to show the whole world that he's capable of saying no to the United States and getting away with it.
Mm-hmm. So, sir, the Russians also claim that the Americans actually are backing the Islamic groups in the region as well. So do you think that it can be considered as a Cold War pattern, for example?
I think there is an element of that. There's an element of that. Of course, Russia, the Soviet Union as such has lost a tremendous influence all over Europe and elsewhere. They know that they cannot go back and exercise the same kind of a sphere of influence. But that doesn't suggest that they don't have the yearning, the desire to reassert themselves in various parts of East Europe. But the East European nations in particular, they have a good taste and remember very well how the Soviet Union conducted itself, and they have absolutely no desire, other than maintaining some kind of cooperation, to be directed, influenced, governed by Russia.